Hello, everyone. I'm Allison Carvalho, the events manager for Barbara's Bookstore, and I'm so incredibly. Oh, there you are. All right.
There
All right, I'm going to go ahead and mute you. Just give me 1 second. There we go. Or not. There we go. Perfect. Alrighty. As you can see, we are still experiencing a couple of technical difficulties, so thank you so much for your patience with us. We had some technical issues, and we are now officially up and running with everyone here. So thank you so much for joining us. We're incredibly excited to be hosting this event. Barbara's Bookstores is a Chicago institution. We've been around since 1963, and we are so happy to be bringing you this virtual event. We are a family-owned and operated bookstore, and we pride ourselves on creating community spaces within our stores and out of them like these events. Before we begin the discussion, I want to give you a quick tour of Crowdcast for those who maybe haven't been here before. First, as I kind of said before, we are still kind of new to virtual events. We sometimes do experience technical difficulties like we did at the beginning of this one. Please bear with us and be patient. If anything does go sideways, we will get back up and running as quickly as possible. Please feel free to chat with anyone else in the chat on the side with any other book lovers. We'll be providing some links and things about upcoming events in there, so make sure to keep an eye out. If you notice that your video is freezing or you're experiencing any kind of lag, please make sure to use the little gear on the bottom, click on it, and change the setting to 360. That tends to lower the HD setting and will get rid of any lag you might be experiencing. The last 10 to 15 minutes of the event will be open for questions. So put all of your questions in the Ask a Question function that is at the bottom of the screen. Make sure that to check it out as well, even if you maybe don't have a question, because you can upvote other people's questions and they'll get answered faster. So definitely make sure to check out that feature. If you look below at the bottom of the screen, you're going to see a little green button that says click here to buy these amazing books. If you click on that link, it will take you to our bookstore website where you will see the event page. And if you scroll down a little, you will see buy the book here, and you can click there to buy either of these incredible books. And lastly, we want to make sure that this event is a fun, informative space, so please make sure that you are as respectful and kind to your fellow book lovers as we are going throughout the event. I think that's everything, so we're going to go ahead and get started by bringing on our first author. Our first panelist is the author of Poison Apples, Poems for You, My Pretty, Ask Me How I Got Here, and the young middle grade series Backyard Witch, written with Ron Koertge. I'm pretty sure I butchered that, so sorry. She has an MA in children's literature from Simmons College and an MFA in writing for children and young adults from Hamline University, and has reviewed children's and young adult books for the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, and the Horn Book. From Highland, New York, I'd like to welcome to the screen Christine Heppermann. Bringing you to the screen. There we go. Hey, how's it going?
Hey, it's good.
I am
Glad
so.
to finally be here.
I was gonna say I am so happy that you made it.
Yeah, it was a time, but here I am.
That was a journey. We went on a whole thing together.
Right.
It was a whole thing, but I'm so happy
what
you're
the
here.
little gremlins in the machine were doing, but they're sleeping now, so it's
They're
fine.
sleeping now, so we can do this thing.
Yeah.
So let's begin with a little bit of your writing journey. So tell me a bit about how you got into writing.
Boy, I just getting into writing in general. I mean, it's kind of been something that I was always into, and specifically always into books for children and young adults. Like, even when I became adult, still my favorite books were things that I read from childhood. So I started off as a reviewer, and I've been a long-time reviewer of books for kids and teenagers for a bunch of different publications. I was the Chicago Tribune young adult reviewer for the past 5 years. So it's kind of, after a while, when you review other people's books, you're like, this is kind of an excuse not to write my own books. So I went back to get my MFA and started writing, and started out thinking I would be a nonfiction writer. because that kind of seemed easier, because you have facts there, right? Like you don't have to make up stuff just out of your head. So it's like, I'm going to be a nonfiction writer. And I did have a book called City Chickens about an urban chicken sanctuary in Minneapolis, which is where we lived for 15 years. And then while I was in school, I started working on a novel, and I was having trouble with it. And so I thought that I'd write poems from the point of views of the different characters. And my advisor at the time was like, wow, I like these poems better than I like your novel. So keep going with that. So that's kind of how I got into the novel and verse genre. And I had written poetry, back in high school, where it was kind of that intense, angsty poetry. And it was kind of like coming back to myself, because I had written poetry and then kind of put it aside and looked back and thought, well, these aren't very good. But then when I finally got back into it, it was like coming home in a way, I think.
I could totally see that kind of, and I think a lot of writers kind of go through a bit of a winding road, you can say, to kind of land into like where they feel the best at it. I feel like that totally.
Yeah, I mean, which is not to say that I haven't, I've written nonfiction, like you said, I've written for teens, I've written early chapter books, so I've kind of been all over the place, and I've reviewed books for those ages too. But really, like the way my brain works, I feel like poetry is how my brain spits things out. This book, What Goes Up, kind of started out, usually you write a book and you have to make it longer. Like this started out kind of with a bunch of just blah all over the page, and then it was going to be in prose, and then I'm like, no, I can't. The only way I can get to this is to think of it in like, it's kind of like poetry is kind of like a novel in verse is like stringing a necklace together. Like you have one bead and you make that bead and then you string it onto the other bead. And I kind of like that trajectory where like, okay, I need to just focus on how she feels in this scene, and then that will lead me to the next scene and the next and the next. So I think, just different writers have different things that have different genres that like are really their natural genre. And for me, I can do the other stuff. I can do prose, but this is kind of where I feel the most at home, I think.
For sure. So what would you say was your inspiration for this book? Like, how did the idea for this story come about?
Well, the interesting thing is like the inspiration for the book is no longer in the book. I talked about the process of taking everything, and kind of clearing it all away. This book was more of a figuring out what wasn't supposed to be in there, and then getting that out of the way and coming down to the essential stuff. And this was a book that my book before this asked me how I got here. I had another book under contract, and I'm like, oh, I'm sure I'll get an idea once I finish that, and it'll come fast. And I had an idea. There was like an abandoned train car near my house that I would always drive by, and I'd think, I wonder, like who would live in this train car? And so I started writing a book about the train car and who might be in there, and about it had a bunch of stuff in it: crows, demonic possession, all this stuff. Like you look at this book now, which is contemporary realistic fiction that takes place in like a span of a couple hours in a girl's day, where she's really trying to figure out to get the courage to get up and get out of bed, which is a loft bed that she has found herself in that she does not want to be in. So it was really a process of clearing away what the book wasn't about to figure out, until I got to like, this is what I really care about, and this is what it's actually about.
Talk about a winding road.
Yes, I think it's that way a lot of times. I mean,
yeah,
you can look at things and just feel so despairing, like, oh, this is, going nowhere. I just have to write more. I have to write more. And it can seem like it's going nowhere. And then all of a sudden you figure out where the heart is. And I think that's true for a lot of writers. You just have to write a lot before you figure out what it is that you're truly interested in and what you're truly trying to say.
For sure, for sure. One of the things I wanted to mention was just, I found it so fascinating. It's not, I don't think it's quite a spoiler, just to show kind of there's some really interesting, beautiful kind of formatting to the verse as well that I thought was really lovely and kind of spoke to kind of just how unique and interesting it is to write in verse, even just having a different font kind of play into some of the
Yeah.
poems. It kind of creates like a different reading experience that I think is
Hmm.
just really fascinating. What
Yeah,
was kind of the
the
thought
poem that you
process
showed.
for that?
Well, the poem that you showed that was like the illustration that looked kind of like a bicycle wheel. So my main character, Jory, is into mushroom hunting and specifically into mushroom art, where she makes spore prints with mushrooms. So I have some that I have made myself here that I can show. Like, you take a mushroom, you put the cap down, and you leave it there overnight, and then it will drop its spores into these interesting patterns, which is something that my older daughter, when she was little, kind of got into like mushrooms. We had field guides and we were into wildflowers and stuff, but for some reason, the mushroom book is the one that she liked the most, and she would go through and you could like point to a photograph and she could give you like the most complicated, like the name for the mushroom when she was like 3 years old. And so it's something that we've kind of always been into. So I thought, oh, I'm going to combine like this family interest and this character is going to be into this unusual type of art. And so the poems are set up as if they're like her art, because she's taking words and putting them as if they are like the spore prints of the mushroom on the page.
It's awesome. It's so fascinating and it was something I felt like I was like, I've never really heard of that before, but I want to investigate it and learn more about it. It's really cool.
Well, it's kind of like art for lazy people, because all you really have to do is find the mushroom, you put it down. I think the story even says it in the book. It's like, if you can, it makes this pretty picture, and then you can take it and do something from it. But a lot of times I just like to just leave it and look at it later. Like, the mushroom makes the art for you, so you don't even have to do anything.
Just a beautiful thing sometimes. I feel like we all sometimes
Yeah,
want to like make something beautiful without a whole lot of heavy lifting.
right, exactly. You don't need glitter, you don't need a lot of art supplies. You just take this thing from your yard, put it down
Just
on a piece of
bloop.
paper, and there you go. Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Thank you so, so much. So what we're going to do, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take you off of the screen for just a little bit, but we'll bring you back in a
Okay.
little bit.
Okay, here's
Awesome.
hoping.
Right? Woof.
Yeah.
All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and bring on our next author. She studied English literature at Kenyon College and earned a master's in education from Lesley University. She works as a children's librarian. Cameron lives in southern Maine. The Stepping Off Place is her debut novel. Let's welcome to the screen Cameron Kelly Rosenblum. There we go. Hello.
Hello, it worked.
It worked. We're doing it.
Yay!
So happy to see you. Thank you so, so much for being here.
Thank you for
So,
having me.
of course, of course. It is now your turn to tell us about your writing journey.
I love listening to writers' journeys because they are so different, but they often have a very common thread. So I, too, have always wanted to write ever since I was a little child. And but I thought, okay, well, the only way I could really figure out how to do that was to try journalism. And I took, I think, one class in journalism. I was like, nope, I like making it up. I don't want to have to stick to the facts. So I'm kind of a little different than Christine that way, I guess. I've always been, a lover of making it up. So I went into education and I got very invested in children's literature. And when I first started, I was writing for middle grade students. I was trying to write chapter books for, 9 to 12-year-olds. And I had this great manuscript and I worked on it, joined SCBWI, the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, met wonderful people, got to go to all these conferences and meet editors and agents and have them look at the work. And it was like, at the time, I wanted to please everyone. So like every time I met someone, I'd be like, oh, that sounds great. I'll do that. And I did that for like 3 years. So the book was, I call it my Franken book, because it was like, I didn't hold on to my own voice in it. I kind of just let everyone else tell me what would work. And so I guess that was my learning novel. It took me a long time to accept that that sucker was not going to go. So I got, I would get really close, and I, but then at the last minute, it just wasn't going to fly with any of the editors that I had it with. So then I think we'll probably talk a lot about a certain life event that was a tragedy that happened in my world. At about the same time, I actually decided it was an art therapy sort of situation. My good friend that I had grown up with took her own life right before we were turning 40, and I was just floored. I was devastated. I hadn't seen her in years, so I think that it really speaks a lot to the power of the friendships you make when you're young. If you really bond with certain people, I'm sure a lot of people have the experience where you can call somebody on the phone that you haven't talked to, but if it's a really good friend, you might not have talked to them for 15 years, but it doesn't make a bit of difference because you just like fall into your cadence together. Anyways, exactly. I started trying, I kind of did like an art therapy where I was like, okay, I'm going to make up this story so that I can, pay tribute to this wonderful friendship that was so important to me. And I'm going to fictionalize the heck out of it so that I get some sort of emotional distance. And, obviously I don't need to be telling anybody else's story. And I decided to set it in high school. And when I started writing YA, then I'd go to those conferences, and it was like, I could tell immediately that it was something different because, first of all, I think because it was so emotional to me, I wasn't going to let go of that voice, but also I just got like immediate positive response everywhere I took it. And so then I just like worked like crazy to get it to a complete manuscript. And I got my dream agent, and here we are.
That's so amazing. That's so fascinating. It's been a long journey
as well. Yeah, it's been a long journey. I think even though I really love to hear Christine talk about poetry, because when whether it's actual poetry, verse, or the thing about reading young children's literature is that the authors need to be so careful and selective of the language and the words, because they cannot make it too long and they cannot use overcomplicated words. And I think because, I was never writing reviews, but I was reviewing them, choosing which books every day. That's what I do, is choose which books I'm going to use with the children. Which ones do I think fit with this kind of kid? Which one fit with this kind of kid? And so I think when you're steeped in it, the language, and just artist after artist after artist, it starts to, I hope, wear off on you a little bit, so that I feel like I benefit from every book in my library that I read aloud. So.
Oh, that's amazing. That also is one of those winding road stories where
indeed,
you kind of are like, this is the kind of book I want to, or maybe not. Maybe
I have no idea what I'm talking about. Yeah.
We all think we do when we start, right?
Indeed,
like we're always like, yeah, this is what we're doing. And
I
it's
know.
like,
I was
no.
like, people would talk about, oh yeah, the first one's your learning novel. I was like, no, it's not. It's not my learning novel. Sure enough, it's my learning novel, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we all think, because I like to write too, and I think we all think that the first one is going to be like, this is my masterpiece. This is my opus.
Yeah.
You don't even know.
I know. But I think my biggest lesson is that I learned somewhere after like my 9 billionth rejection letter, I think I learned that I really wasn't going to give it up, even if I got to a certain point. I was like, okay, so what if I'm just never published? Like, is this worth it? Is it worth it for me to keep doing this? And then I realized, like, there's no way I'm not doing it. So I might as well and I think that's when I started listening to my own voice more, and trusting it a little more. When I kind of let go of some of the oh, it has to happen this way and it has to happen that way. When I sort of just kind of like fell into the art of it more, I think that's when it clicked.
Really clicked, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about the stepping off place. And specifically, there was one thing, we're going to talk a little bit more about it later, but tell me a little bit about it and kind of the thought process of having, because the book is told a lot through kind of jumping through time to kind of before Hattie passed away, after Hattie passed away.
Yeah.
And so can you talk a little bit about the book and talk about that kind of formatting?
Absolutely. So the book centers around the narrator's name is Reed, and she is best friends with this girl Hattie. And Reed is in her own mind, and maybe some of her peers at high school, not necessarily Hattie, but she sees herself as Hattie's sidekick. Hattie's athletic. Hattie's becoming beautiful before her eyes. Hattie has that like it quality that makes guys fall at her feet, and the upperclassmen even think she's cool even when she's not younger than them, and all the things that so Reed really looks up to her. And it's not a spoiler because at the beginning of chapter 1, it sort of starts when there's a car chase at the beginning, because Reed comes out of work one day in August, and her friend Hattie is not supposed to be. Her friend is supposed to be in Maine at the family vacation house, but Reed thinks she sees her in her car. She has this very distinctive rabbit convertible, kind of old, beater kind of car, and so she starts following her in traffic. She's trying to catch her, but it's rush hour and she can't get to her. And she's yelling to her and she can't get her attention. And she starts to like bring up all these insecurities like, my God, is she ditching me? Why is she here? She didn't tell me that she was going to be back. Well, by the end of the chapter, she's gone back to her house. She lost her and couldn't find her. And her mom comes downstairs and tells her that she's had this terrible phone call, and that in fact Hattie drowned the night before in Maine. So it kind of all starts on this like mystical footing of like, what the heck was that? If that wasn't Hattie, who was that? And so that kind of like kicks off a little bit of a mysterious side to it. But so really the whole thing pivots around the fact that I love this dynamic of superhero and sidekick, especially because there are like none of females. It's like a very familiar trope in movies. There'll be, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid or whatever. I mean, that's an oldie, but like there's always these duos, Batman and Robin, but there really aren't for women, and it kind of bugged me. So I was like, okay, well, so if we have this superhero sidekick dynamic, what happens to the sidekick if the superhero gets ripped away, like right when everything's just starting to get interesting? Because I tried to picture, going back to my friend, I kind of got, my God, what if that had happened to me? Because I definitely have a little bit of a sidekick. Certainly when I was younger, I think I kind of outgrew it finally, but I definitely had that sort of sidekick mentality where I was like, I love to be part of the action, but I was fine being the one like next to the one who's glowing big, just I could really relate to that. So it's actually to have the superhero ripped away. That's the beginning of Reed's story, even though it's the end of Hattie's story. Still, I needed my audience to fall in love with Hattie to make the story work at all. They had to understand why this was so important. So the only way I could do that was to jump around in time. So I did it in a non-linear. Also, sort of selfishly, it was kind of cathartic writing. So some of those sad chapters are really me feeling really sad. And so when I wrote it, it was difficult. And so I think it's like human nature, after a funeral, we always go, I mean, not always, but like a lot of times it's people after the sadness, then they go out and they have memories and they have a party and they think about all the great things. And so I was kind of playing those two off each other throughout the book, also to give levity to a pretty heavy topic. So I was trying. I was trying to make it not lighthearted. It's never lighthearted, but I was trying to
add some levity.
Make that, yeah, and make it a little more enjoyable. I could never read a book that is heartbreaking from page 1 to page whatever. I that's just not my. I know they're beautifully done, so don't get me wrong. It's not that I don't highly respect those kinds of books, but I was like, I'm really trying to write for teenagers, and I feel like I don't want to make a bunch of teenagers feel sad. They're not going to
I was going to say, I feel like there's a certain level of optimism that teenagers have that, like, would counteract that, where it would be difficult for them to have it in them to read something so harrowing.
Yeah.
For, like, a whole book. They, like, teenagers need a little bit of that so that they can see kind of their hopefulness reflected in it.
Exactly. And I certainly wanted ultimately, it's a survivor story, even though, it's centered on the friendship and it's centered on the loss, but I did not want that to be, if you think of the emotional arc of Reed's journey is to learn how to stand on her own 2 feet. And so right. I knew that going in. So it's kind of like at the beginning, she starts totally, she calls it her social oxygen. She starts totally dependent. And then at the end, no spoilers, but, she learns how to stand on her own by the end. The journey forces her to do that. So, yeah, for sure. That's why it jumps around in time.
No, that totally makes sense. So Reed's family life has a little bit of extra complication because she has this younger brother, Spencer, who's on the autism spectrum. And I feel like it was a very candid portrayal of what that can be like. There were lots and lots of ups and downs and like kind of those same like sibling annoyances that you might have if you have siblings and you can find them kind of annoying, but then kind of compounded with the added layer of having a sibling on the autism spectrum. So can you talk a little bit about kind of Spencer and the idea of putting him in the story?
Yes. Okay, well, so full disclosure, Spencer's a lot like my son, Jack. So I have a son who's very deep on the autism spectrum. And I am been thrilled over the last probably, 10 years or so. We're starting to see more representation of people on the spectrum. But when you have someone in your family who is that deep on the spectrum, like those kids you don't see a lot of. And I thought I wanted it's kind of a big part of why Reed is so sort of like insecure. She's kind of gone through, first of all, her whole family dynamic centers around this, everyone kind of has to make it work for Spencer. And so she becomes like sort of, it's just expected that she's going to do what's expected because the whole thing will fall in if she's not just being a good kid and not making a ruckus. And so that becomes part of her identity. And I think that's why she becomes such a, she's kind of a wallflower and insecure. And so I really, basically it's a shout out to all those kids out there who have siblings with really severe special needs. It doesn't have to be autism, but that's why I brought him in, is so it's kind of my little autism advocacy, sneaking it in to just, it's a tough road for these kids. It's tough for the parents, but it's tough for the kids. And I really feel like, it's kind of a subplot, but I really felt that it was a good one to have in there because I don't see it.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree. I feel like that is, it was something that was really powerful to kind of sympathize with and kind of get, because I think a lot of times people will talk about the more like kind of the way that other characters would react to Spencer is the vision of what you normally see. And so kind of getting to be inside the head of someone that's living that day to day, and I feel like very different.
Yeah. And I of course live it day in. So it's kind of like my version of the own voices thing. It's like, I know what that's like. And, I know that the people who know what it's like are going like this. Cause even when it's just, I also love, love to have Hattie be the one who loves. She just is fascinated. She doesn't try to say he's perfect and flawless, but she brings a new appreciation, and it even like buoys the entire family, not just Reed. They just love that this person comes in and sees Spencer as this like little wonder of just like what a fascinating creature he is, and he's so clever in his way. And I think that the whole family really loves that about Hattie, and I don't know, that's just one of the things I love that Reed got that from Hattie.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing so much of your story.
Yeah.
So we're going to go ahead. We're going to bring Christine back on. There we... Oh, nope, wait.
Oh.
Once again, that was my trigger finger.
Oh, good.
There we go. Hi.
Hi.
That was my trigger finger. I double clicked, and so it like went like boop boop. I'm like, that's not helpful. Come on now.
Mom, I'm gonna panic, but everything's good.
Yes.
Alrighty, so not to bring the giggles down, but we're going to talk about anxiety, so that's fun. So both of your books deal heavily with anxiety, especially the anxiety that comes specifically from friendship and relationships. Jory is struggling to kind of keep her friendship intact with her ex, Ian, and Reed is kind of investigating this friendship with Hattie. So what about these particular relationship dynamics stuck out to you as you're working on the project? I'm going to go ahead and direct who talks first, because that kind of makes things go nice and easy. So let's begin with Christine.
I think, in a lot of my books, I have girls who are dealing with not only anxiety, but kind of guilt and shame. And I think that is a source of anxiety for a lot of people. And so Jory is in a situation after a party where, things happened, and I wanted to kind of trace back, when Cameron talked about structure and layering memory and things. This book all ostensibly takes place as she's lying in this bed trying to figure out how to get up and, kind of sneak out of this guy's dorm room after a night that she, made some choices that she might not have necessarily made if she hadn't have been dealing with a lot of other things in her life, some family issues that have been happening. When Cameron was talking about the car scene, about thinking that she saw Hattie driving behind her, there's a similar poem in my book about Jory, the main character, driving in the car with her mom and thinking she sees her dad behind her. And she turns around and then her dad is gone, and it's during the workday, and she's like, what is he doing here? But it's a little bit of an opposite situation where he was actually there, but he's denying it. And the reason he's denying it is because he was having an affair and he was out when he, was not expected to be out. And so he's, she's saying, oh, didn't I see you? And he's like, no. And so then where do you go from that? It's a book about kind of realizing that your parents are flawed and trying to deal with your anger at them. And so I think a lot of the emotions and a lot of the conflict that she's been having with her friends and her ex and things really stems from this family betrayal, where she feels so much anger. When you're talking too about levity, like Jory has a sense of humor, and I think a lot of teens and just a lot of us deal with painful things in our lives by trying to laugh it off and trying to, brush it aside, make jokes about it. And she's kind of coming to a crisis point where she realizes that things are just going to keep exploding around her if she doesn't deal with the core issue, which is being angry, at both her dad for what he did and her mom for what she thinks of as not like standing up for herself and being a strong woman. And, so trying to understand your parents also, as people and as flawed people is kind of where, her anxiety is coming from, kind of this betrayal within her family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so it's
Cameron?
Well, I just see anxiety all around me with it's such a common problem now, and I kind of elected to sort of keep social media to a minimum in my this particular book, but in reality, I think that plays into a lot of teenage angst, and even younger, tweens, and so I feel like for Reed, a lot of, like I started to say before about her brother, she always is kind of nervous that he's gonna like go off, like he could have a tantrum, he could do something that where he hurts himself, and it's her responsibility, and so she's kind of always on edge about that, and then it just kind of oozes into her social life because Christine, it kind of oozes into her social life, where she really before Hattie, she wasn't even connected with anybody really. She was kind of a loner, and then so I think that I wanted to put her in a situation where she really didn't have a choice but to kind of buck up. And the reason she's bucking up is because she loves her friends. And so it's making her, I think it's really true that people are, it's easier to stand up for somebody else sometimes than it is to stand up for yourself. And I think that through the story, at first she's really doing everything she does to try to get to the bottom of what happened to Hattie. She's doing it for Hattie because she feels like she owes it to her friend to figure it out. But ultimately, she ends up realizing that she has more confidence than when she got put to the test, she could handle a lot more than she thought. But I do think that the anxiety piece is just immense in our culture right now, and I don't think pandemics help it too much. I just think it's really hard. It's hard to be a teenager right now, and I feel for them.
Yeah, I mean, that literally took me directly into my next question, which was saying that, like, being a teen, real rough right now.
Yeah.
Like, it is super hard. It's very difficult to grow up. And, like, I wonder about how much of the characters in these stories kind of reflect your own past high school selves. Like, how much of, like, what of your past selves have you maybe brought into your stories? Let's go ahead. We can begin with Cameron.
As I said, I could definitely connect to I think a lot of my friends in high school, I was sort of, in my own mind, I don't know if they necessarily thought this, but I was sort of a sidekick. I felt like a sidekick. I have an older sister who's a very larger than life kind of character, and she was 4 years older than me. So even when we were little, she literally was like larger than life to me because she was always doing everything ahead of me and all that. So I think I connect to that feeling a lot, which helped me write the character. I'm also just super connected to my 17-year-old. I don't know, my like inner 17-year-old. I have very vivid memories of that period of my life. So, but my daughter was like, Mom, well, I don't want to give it away. I can't give it away. But my mother was like, my daughter was like, oh my God, Mom, did you do that? I was like, no, I didn't. That wasn't me. It's not me. It's just the narrator is in first person.
Oh my gosh, I can only imagine. What about you, Christine?
I mean, I grew up Catholic, and so I think maybe that is an obvious place from where a lot of my fascination with dealing with girls who are trying to overcome shame and guilt comes from. And why, I look at things from a feminist perspective, and it's like, why, people have these feelings, and why do they have them? Maybe it's not something that is coming from inside you. It's something that is, kind of thrust upon you, whether or not you grow up Catholic, whether just growing up as a woman in this society. So a lot of my stories come from, I have two daughters, and they were both teenagers when I was writing this book. So I did, use some of the ways that they and their friends are feeling, but it just seems like a continuum from how I felt in high school. And even though, I'm not raising them in the Catholic faith, and they're still, having a lot of these same emotions that just come from the culture, come from society. And so I really like to challenge that and have the girls in my books think, here I'm feeling bad about this. Like, why am I feeling bad? I like to have a lot of, I guess, questions more than answers, and look at things. I mean, the pandemic, I guess, has forced us to all think that things have gone along a certain way, and now they're just completely different. And so while that's bad in a lot of respects, in some ways it's good, because you can look at things and think maybe things going along as normal weren't always great. So we have an opportunity to rethink and restructure and, rebuild stuff in a way that maybe is healthier for all of us, I think.
For sure. I think a lot of the struggle too is, I think a lot of teenagers, and especially this is represented in both of your books, struggle with whether or not they're being heard, and like whether or not they feel like they're being heard. And I can see a lot of what's been going on right now as well is kind of a reflection of people struggling with just trying to be understood. And so I kind of, as I was reading both of your books, I was kind of thinking about that a lot. And I was wondering what was kind of so hard to articulate what I want to say. Like, what was the most kind of important thing that you wanted to be heard from your book, would you say? Let's begin with Christine.
You mean that I wanted readers to get out of it, or?
Yeah, I would say in that case, like, what would you want what would you want a reader to get out of the book?
I think looking at it, the interesting thing, Cameron said her book was kind of like therapy, and mine was kind of like therapy too. And then I got to the end, and my main character kept like staying angry about stuff, and my editor was like, well, you can't just have someone who starts angry and then ends angry, because you need a character arc. You need like growth. And I kept thinking, yeah, she's growing, she's confronting her mom about these things. But in the end, what she really had to do was forgive her parents. And even, for a long time, I thought, oh, it's going to have to be this confrontation between her and her dad. But it was really her being angry at her mom for staying with her dad after he has betrayed her. And so she, throughout the book, she's kind of trying to like take revenge against her dad through her art, and do this kind of revenge art piece that's going to like throw, that's going to make him see,
such an art kid thing to do.
Right, like what a bad guy is, and she has his plans. But then as I was writing it, I thought that was the main conflict between her and her dad. And I'm like, no, she's really angry at her mom, and she has to figure out a way to forgive her mom. And even if she thinks her mom's not making a great decision, like, it's her mom's decision to make. And some of the things that she is dealing with her ex-boyfriend, she has to realize that I guess loving people means you might get hurt, and sometimes you have to take that chance. And so I think that is where Jory ends up, and where I want people to end up. It's weird to say at a moment of forgiveness, because I thought that was not, here we're going to show that this betrayal was awful, but it is kind of like somebody hurt you, and you have to try to figure out how to still love them and accept them.
Yeah. Sometimes I think characters, they just kind of go off on their own, and you're like, wait, you're going over there? That's where we're going? I'm not sure. I guess that's where we're going.
Yeah, exactly.
They kind of go on their own journeys.
Yeah, you think you're moving them around like they're your little dolls, but actually, when you try to do that, it just makes it so inauthentic, I think.
You're reminding me, in graduate school, I did creative arts and education was my master's. And I had this one class where I read a book, and gosh, I've got to find it. It was some PhD paper, but the person was saying that no matter what kind of art an artist is creating, they can think that it is not about themselves, but it's like no matter how hard you try, it's going to seep in there, and part of it's going to be about you. So I don't know, that just kind of made me think of what you're thinking is sometimes you're working out your own stuff and you don't even know you're working it out, and maybe don't even until like 3 years after it's a book and you look at it and you're like, oh, that's
It's the riding behind your own back phenomenon. Is
exactly,
what one of my
exactly.
Called it.
So it is a fascinating thing, but I think I lost the question. Sorry.
That is okay. I was going to repeat it for you. So now we got off on a bit of a tangent. I was going to say, what do you hope that people hear from your book?
Okay. So, my book deals with a suicide, and that was a really hard choice for me to make, to even go there, because it is such a difficult topic. And I knew that if I was going to do it, I had to really, really do a good job with it, because I wanted to honor how hard that is. It's any sudden loss is horrible, of course. Any loss of a young person is horrible. But I think when suicide really takes a toll, not only on the friends and family, but it has like this weird ripple effect on an entire community. And so I that is a big reason why I focused on the survivor, is because I really wanted to almost give like a gift to the survivor, to say, you know what, you are going to be able to go on. You can do it. It's going to be hard and it's going to be messy and it's not what you thought was going to happen. But I think that it's so important for kids to be able to, honestly, like I always knew that Hattie was going to not, I knew she was going to be gone in chapter 1, but I honestly was going to have it be like an accident. And in fact, in the first draft, it was an accident, because I was like, I am not going near suicide. That is way too hard. And if I do it wrong, it could have horrible repercussions. So then I realized that it was the story, because what my own experience is, that I was so blindsided by the fact that this person who was so, I mean, the true parts of it are that she was larger than life to me. She was sort of my idol. We totally got each other in a way that, lasted a lifetime, even though we lived on different sides of the country. But the fact that I could have a phone conversation with her 6 months before it happened and have literally no idea she even suffered from depression is like, that should not happen. And so what I decided was, well, God, this is the story. It is the story. I can't not write the story. And remember, again, I had no idea if this thing was ever going to get published. I was really writing it for myself. And that was the story, is Reed making sense of how this possibly could be and how her friend had hidden all this. And so what I wanted to do is open up an opportunity for conversations around the stigma that is attached to mental health and mental illnesses, from personality disorders and all kinds of, we just live in a culture where we don't really like to go there a lot. And I feel like if you look at the suicide rates right now, the statistics are horrifying and terrifying as a parent. And a teacher who works with young people all the time. And I just, I really wanted to provide an opportunity for people to be able to discuss, talk about the stigma, maybe be a little more aware of your friends around you. Maybe, like even during the pandemic, it seems so clear to me. It's like, oh, you know what? I haven't heard from that person in a while. I'm not just going to take it for granted that person's doing fine. Like maybe before this happened, I might have just not thought about it. But now I'm like, if I see somebody write something even a little bit iffy, one of my friends on Facebook, I'm like, how you doing? What's going on? You know, because I just think it's so important. And I found some, in my research, I found some wonderful foundations. I put some of them in the back of the book that are teenage driven, that are really all about finding hope, breaking the stigma. And I feel like that's an incredibly empowering thing for people who have survived either a loss or have survived their own ideation, to have a place where they can go and just talk about it openly and try to help other people, can give people an entirely new meaning. And so really that's why I decided, once I decided I was going in there, I just worked my butt off to make it hopeful and hopefully helpful. Those are my two goals in life. In this book. I did get a really beautiful Instagram message from a reader that I had I'd never met before, and she was saying how she had lost her cousin when she herself was 9 years old, and how this book she just loved reading it through Hattie. And I'll tell you what, I was like a blubbering mess that I was like, okay, we can be done now. It doesn't have to sell any more books. I helped one kid see themselves. I'm done.
Yeah.
Not really, but it was just really beautiful. I'm just, if I never get another letter like that was enough for me.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah. When you know that your work has reached someone, I feel like that has to be so incredibly helpful and wonderful.
Gratifying.
Exactly. So I was going to ask about research. So, Christine, did you have any particular research that you did kind of in the process of working on your book at all?
I mean, the one thing that's not necessarily related to research, but related to what Cameron just said, is talking about mental health and stigma. I just wanted to recommend a book I wrote an essay for. It's edited by Kelly Jensen. It's called Don't Call Me Crazy. 33 Voices Start the Conversation About Mental Health. So it is essays by different YA authors and different celebrities like Kristen Bell and I think Nancy Kerrigan and other people, just talking about a wide range of mental health issues. And, so I think that that particular collection, I wrote an essay for about fears that I had when I was a kid about being possessed by the devil. And I started off with my book, Catholic Girl, The Exorcist. Like, that was like my the scariest movie of all time for me. And so a lot of the research for this book, I was actually, the book that's on the page, you would never know that there was going to be a character who was possessed by a demon in it. It was not realistic fiction. It was surreal. And I was trying to do this thing where I'm going to do a main character who has two POVs, because there's her and then there's her demon. And so I went off on all these directions, reading all these books about demonic possession, doing so after a while, and I love research too. I started as like I said, I started doing nonfiction, and some of the projects I'm working on now have a historical bent to them, so I could just get lost in research and not write for a long time. But after a while, when I realized, no, the core of the story is contemporary realism, minimalistic as far as time, and just takes place in this really compressed amount of time. I kind of then stopped the research and just went inward more, and went inward for the character. So at that point, I kind of figured out what the emotional core of the book was. And I think that I used research for a long time to just distract myself from what the emotional core of the book was. So I guess my research method is not one to recommend.
Well, you can recommend looking within yourself. like looking
Right,
within
right.
yourself and
Right, looking within
delving
yourself.
deep.
But it also, in a way, like back to what we were talking about, the journey of writing, you never know. So I think I had to go on that really long journey and, research about demonic possession. And then I ended up, with an essay for this book that was about that. And I thought that was something I was going to deal with in this novel, but actually I think I dealt with it in this book.
Yeah.
So it all, everything
it all kind of comes together.
Right? Yeah. Nothing is ever wasted. Like everyone thinks, I wrote all these pages, or I have this draft that I put in a drawer. Like even if that particular book is not the one, that gets published, it's something that like propels you forward into the.
It kind of informs you. Yeah, it informs.
Yeah. Right.
Exactly. By the way, I did locate Don't Call Me Crazy, and I put the link in the chat. So if you're interested in picking up that book, you can also grab it right there.
Fantastic.
All right. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. So what would you say other authors, and like I kind of am leaning towards YA or like younger voices, what would you say would be something that you would want an author to keep in mind when they are writing about these difficult issues and writing about mental health? What would you say would be something that you would recommend they keep in mind?
For me, or
yeah, I was about to. Someone looked like they were about to talk, so then I didn't say it. Cameron, you go.
Okay. I think that if you're going to write, I think it's, first of all, a great idea, because I think we're all we have our own expertise about mental health, whether we know it or not, I think, and especially writers tend to be very reflective people. So I think I think the important thing is to write about mental health issues with honesty and respect for everyone who's involved. Either the person, if you have a character who's struggling, but then also how that the people around, because sometimes the people around, sort of like there's, like Al-Anon or something, is for the people who live with someone who's an alcoholic, not that they have a drinking problem themselves, but like sometimes sort of like with Reed and Spencer, like she almost needed like counseling to just learn how to deal with having a brother that's so high needs, you know what I mean? So I think just dealing with it honestly and sticking to things that you know in some way. I'm not saying you have to have a PhD in it, but I think that you should have some firsthand experience to write about it, because it's powerful stuff, and a lot of good writing, I think, can come from when you're talking about really important emotional content.
For sure. What about you, Christine?
And I think, because it's powerful stuff, I think my main message is just to be kind to yourself while you're doing it, because it can be really hard, and you can think, a young writer, if someone's writing with the idea of, I'm going to make this into a book and it's going to be published, and you can think of it as your job, which it is, writing is a job, but it's also taking a big part of yourself most of the time. Even if you're writing, a fantasy set on another planet, you can think, this is so not about me. And then all of a sudden you're crying because the alien's mother died or something, and so you have to just be able to not put too much pressure on yourself, because it's hard.
Yeah.
I think that's my main message. It's hard.
Yeah. And that's why fictionalizing, for me, it's so much easier to fictionalize it, because even though the essence of the character might be somebody that you know very well, you can remove, you can change all the details, and you can still kind of tap into that powerful stuff, but you can also give yourself a little distance. I think I'm kind of saying the same thing in different way, but I would completely, when I do with kindergarten, we have this thing where it's like they all want to talk at once. And so instead of doing that, you're like, I agree. That's what I want to do, which is pretty hokey, but yeah.
For sure. I think it also helps be able to have some perspective, to take yourself out of it enough to be able to kind of look at it from multiple sides too. Because I know, at least for me, it's like sometimes if I'm really into something, it's like I can't see the other side of it. I can kind of only see the truth I'm living. And so I can also, what you're saying totally resonates for me, because it makes sense to kind of give yourself that distance so that then you can like kind of work through it separately from the work, but still kind of be able to work through it with the work too.
Exactly.
In a way. Definitely. All right, so we are at our last question before we go to the ask a question function. So if you have any questions that you want to ask, now is the time to pop them in there. My last question, funnily enough, this conversation has been great because I feel like we've like naturally hit almost every question that I had for you. And Christine, you had already recommended a really wonderful book that I'm personally very excited to pick up. I want to read that book. I'm very here for it. Is there, for both of you, are there any books that you would recommend that maybe that deal with these issues that you would recommend for readers? We can begin with Cameron.
Well, I was very influenced, probably like half the Western Hemisphere, but I was very influenced by John Green, because I found the voice that he writes in, you can always spot it no matter who the characters are. It kind of comes, you just hear the way he is. And I feel like in a lot of his books, he gets really close to mental health issues. Aside maybe from the most recent one, he gets very close to them, but he doesn't necessarily really name them and get into that whole side of it. But I think he does a really good job of very emotional writing like that. He's a big influence on me. Also, E. Lockhart, I think, writes really interestingly. And also, her characters are really deep, and so those are two big ones for me.
For sure. Awesome.
There's one other book I want to recommend. Brandy Colbert is an author that I like a lot, and she has a book from a year or two ago, I think, called Little and Lion, which is not about a character with mental health issues, but about a character whose brother has mental health issues, and how her brother, is not taking his meds, or she's not sure if he's taking his meds, and like the worry from someone from the outside too, which is also something, when you have kids and one of them is going through a rough time, the sibling on the outside can be, experiencing all this fear and anxiety, but feeling like, oh, I just have to kind of be, kind of tread lightly, because we need to put all our energy on to this person. But really, this person then just having to deal with the anxiety of worrying whether their brother is okay also needs the attention to, help them with worry and fear and all that kind of stuff. So I really like that book by Brandy, and she's got a new book that is not necessarily about mental health issues, but is very relevant for right now, called The Voting Booth, which is takes place in a single day, which I like a lot, and it is about two kids who meet at the polls, and one of them tries to vote, and he's not in, they're like, oh, you're not in the system, and so they're running around all day trying to make sure that he votes. So that is definitely a book to check out now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's amazing. That one definitely sounds so good.
Yeah, there's a lot of great sort of activist YA characters right now. I love. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, I was able to pop a couple of links in the chat for John Green book, as well as Little and Lion, and I just found the link for The Voting Booth, so I'm going to pop that in there as well.
And Brandy also she's a former Chicagoan too, so.
Yes.
Now she's in LA. We can forgive her, but she did used to live in Chicago.
But she used to be here, and when you're from here, you're from here. Like, that's just because you go somewhere else, it doesn't mean you're not from here anymore.
Right.
I was also thinking of the book Where'd You Go, Bernadette?
Oh, yeah.
I feel like that's I feel like it's accessible for YA, but it's got great crossover for adults. And I think I saw it's being made into a movie, but I think that one's a great one because the mother is definitely dealing with mental health issues, and the sort of spunky daughter, and it is all letters. I love that book. I like when they there's some humor in it. Obviously, that's definitely something I look for. But yeah,
For sure. Oh, I found that one too. I love it when it all comes together. Sometimes I can like search and like our search algorithm makes it difficult to find, but I was able to find that one pretty quick. Yay! Oh, these are
All
all such
right.
wonderful recommendations. Thank you both so much for sharing them. Alrighty, so we have a question, and this one is from Alex. And Alex is wondering, um, were there any major changes that your editor suggested that you implemented or rejected?
yes and yes.
Go for it, Cameron.
Well, originally, when I first wrote it, at the end of chapter 1, like now, as you read chapter 1, it's really not a spoiler. It's like page 10, so I don't feel like I'm really spoiling too much. But it's suggested at the end of the chapter, although it's not conclusive. It is suggested that Hattie has died by suicide, and in the original version, it more mirrored my personal experience, which was she's totally taken by surprise when she discovers the truth later in the story, and instead thinks it's an accidental thing. But we decided that actually that's a really not cool plot twist. So we that was a really good suggestion that I hadn't thought of, because it was kind of a major overhaul to do that. So that was a big revision. But then I feel like, sometimes there are little things that they say, oh, well, why is this particular scene need to be in there? I don't want to. There's a great scene where they're, let's just say it has to do with a prank involving the Headless Horseman. And it didn't really have it was more just like a character sketch, but it was an antic. And I just found it really brought a ton of levity to it. So I kind of reworked it to give it a little more of a hook into the story, because it didn't really have a reason besides I just like that part. So I feel like editors are very flexible to a point, and I think as a writer you have to be very flexible also.
For sure. What about you, Christine?
My editor, I guess I would call it more of her giving me permission than giving me a suggestion. When I was floundering around at the very beginning, I was trying to write this in prose because I had written to a book of poetry and then a novel in verse. I'm like, I'm going to show how versatile I am. And so we had conceived of this as a prose project, and I was going around and around. And, I kind of came to her and was like, in tears at lunch. This is just not working. She's like, well, you can write it in poetry if you want. I'm like, really? So once she gave me permission to, you don't have to prove yourself this way. Like if the story, it's kind of how, what's best for the story. And for this particular story, verse was, again, the right form, and there could be a different story, that is going to be better in prose. So it was just such a relief when she gave me permission, not to beat myself up and trying to make this into a prose novel. And then my agent, like there was a character, a male character, where Jory got up and actually talked to this guy, and they were having conversations at breakfast, and just like, I'm just bored with this. I'm like, you know what? We can take the men out. Like, she doesn't need to talk to him. She can be up here by herself thinking about stuff, and this guy can just be sleeping the whole time, and it's fine. So once I took out all these, boring conversations with this dude, then that was good too.
That is amazing. I love that. Alrighty, well, I think that's it. Thank you both so much for being here. This was such a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
I
Wonderful,
really
yeah.
enjoyed it.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thanks so much.
I'm definitely
All
going to
right.
pick up some of your suggestions there, Christine.
I know, right? They're so good. They're all such wonderful books. So please, please, everyone, make sure to check out these links over on the chat. And definitely make sure to click on the green button below so you can pick up these two incredible, amazing, beautiful, beautiful books. We do have book plates available for both of these books. So if you want a signed copy of the book, if you click on that link, you'll be able to get a signed copy as well as 10% off using the code event. I believe it's event. It might be events with an S, but I believe it's just event. At checkout, you'll be able to get 10% off of the book for coming to this event today. We hope to see you again for one of our other amazing virtual events. This was the last of our back to school series, and we now are coming up on our Romance Month series where we have a couple events coming up. We have a panel this weekend. It will be happening on Saturday at 4 p.m. Featuring two Karina authors, which is incredible. They're both LGBTQIA. They are wonderful. And then we also have an event on August 25th at 6 p.m. featuring David Levithan and his book 19 Love Stories, which is a beautiful series of love stories. It's so wonderful. So please, please, please check back in about those events. We also have our new book club, our new inclusive book club, Culture Exposure, which is an anti-oppression, anti-racist book club. We pick books written by marginalized community authors, and then we discuss those books and talk about ways to continue to push forward anti-oppression. And that will actually be happening next Wednesday at 6 p.m. Right here on Crowdcast. So make sure to check out our website for more details on that. We'll be reading Octavia's Brood, Short Stories for Social Justice, which is so good. Can't recommend it enough. All right, everyone. Thank you all so, so much for being here. Thank you so much, Cameron and Christine. And we hope to see you again soon. Happy reading, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.